Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to another fun workshop from us here at the InfoSec Club at the U of C. My name's Jeremy. I'm president of the club. I'll be running the second in our two-part malware workshop that we've been doing. If you joined us last week, we did a bunch of hands-on malware stuff, and it will come in handy in a few places for this week. That was mostly to put you through the paces and show you how it's all done by hand. But this week we're going to do some automated stuff and see how we can make machines do it all for us. Before we do that, though, let me share my screen. Just 1 second. Get this presentation going. Screen one. There we go. All right. So like it says here, this week we'll be using a website called Any.Run and learning the basics of a program called Yara, which is used in a lot of threat detection. So before we go there, this is the link for the attendance. I'm going to toss that link in. Nope, I don't have it ready for you because my computer threw up the old blue screen of death before this workshop. So if I suddenly disappear, that's why. Workshop links. Here we go. No, the link didn't save when the blue screen of death happened. So just a second, let me pull this out of here. There is the link for everyone for the attendance. Remember, signing the attendance form is part of gaining full membership to the club. You have to have attended at least half of the workshops throughout the year in order to gain full voting status in the club. That lets you vote in the AGM, which is coming up at the end of this month. So yeah, everyone gets signed up. We'll be going through. We'll be keeping track of this. Anyone that has attended at least half and has met all the membership requirements, you will be getting a link at the end of this month for voting in the AGM. Those are constitutional amendments and for the execs. So I'm going to keep moving from there. While you're doing that, I'll make some announcements. Next week is the last speaker in our speaker series. We'll have Emily Vincent. She works in talent and recruitment in tech, and she's going to be talking us through the hiring process, trying to get internships. If you're like me, you've been thinking about this a lot recently, spending a lot of time doing this. So she's going to be here to share some information, some tips, some hints, and hopefully guide us through this process, which, as we all know, can be really nerve-wracking. So that's next week. I'll remind you again at the end. That's going to be next week at 6 p.m. A reminder that you have to be a paid member to go to that speaker event. That's $5 for the second semester, this semester right now, and that's good until the end of August, and you'd have to pay again at the beginning of next year. But that membership fee goes for paying for the speaker events, of which this is going to be the last one. So I mentioned the AGM. Is on March 29th. That's in, I believe, 2 weeks. So the AGM, we're going to have a quick sort of year in review, what the club's done, some of the numbers, a review of the CTF, a sort of report on how the CTF went, and a finance review, so how much money the club has and how we're doing financially. This is the sort of big meeting that oversees how the club runs and works. You might not see a lot of this stuff if you're just on the Discord server. You would see it a little more if we were in person, but it's all kind of in the background of the stuff that the execs are doing during the year, because we're all online. But this is the one time when we'll sort of tell you about how things have gone and how the club is doing right now. Then we'll also have the vote. So on that day, on March 29th, you'll receive an email. It'll bring you to a website, and you can vote on that website. All voting is going to be electronic because of COVID-19. So yeah, from the 29th, you'll have 1 week to vote, and then 1 week later, we'll reveal the results of the vote. You get to vote on execs and on the constitutional amendments. Another announcement is that Dr. Aycock has got in touch with us and let us know that he is offering a new course, Computer Science 399.05, Reverse Engineering, or Introduction to Reverse Engineering. So it's going to be taught by Dr. Aycock, and it's going to be taking place in winter 2022. Reverse engineering, for those of you who have done any of it, can be pretty challenging. Dr. Aycock is, I have to tell you, a sort of recognized expert in this field. He was the one who taught the malware and viruses course before, but we talk to people both inside and outside the university, and they always tell us that he's the one that we should be talking to about this stuff. He really knows what he's talking about, and I'm really excited that this course is being offered. Again, that's winter 2022. It looks like there's 2 sections of the course. I think the only prerequisite is that you've taken Computer Science 213 or 231, the sort of intro computer science course. But it's being offered for both majors and non-majors. And he's going to teach you how to reverse engineer programs, so dig into compiled stuff and try to reverse programs and code to figure out what it does. That's really exciting. We were really sad that he wasn't teaching the malware course anymore, but it's good to have him teaching something that, especially something that we can use in InfoSec, and that comes in really handy. So that's the Computer Science 399.05. That'll be in the upcoming course registration calendar for people to take. So with that, we'll start the rest of this workshop. Again, the warning that we had last week. In case you didn't join us last week, the warning is that malware is dangerous. I said this last week, but I'm going to say it again this week. It's interesting to analyze. It can teach us a lot of things. It's really important because it's out there a lot in the world, but it can do dangerous things to your computer and to other people's computers. And it's important that you know what you're doing when you're using it or examining it. It's not only can it do damage to your machine, it can do damage to other people's machines. Remember that it will damage your files and your systems. It will spy on your system, and it will spy on you. And it can spread to hurt other people. So last week we used a system that was completely disconnected from the internet and closed off from your home computer so that it wouldn't spread. And that was the sandbox that we analyzed in. More warnings is you need to be very careful when you use it. Try to make sure you know what you're doing. Do not play with malware. And I put play there as not only as in like don't just run it to see what it does, but don't put it on other people's systems. It's not a joke. It's pretty serious stuff. It can actually land you in a lot of trouble. So again, look at me. Malware is dangerous. Be very careful with it. Yes, using it nefariously, again, can get you banned from our club and also can have serious actual legal consequences. People go to jail, get charged large amounts of money. Some people get banned from using computers for doing really bad things with code. Not only on their own machines, but even if it unintentionally gets out, sometimes people get very serious charges. So yeah, it's very serious. Don't play around with this. Be very careful when you're using it. So today we have 2 goals that we're gonna try to accomplish. The first is we're going to learn how to use Any.Run. We're going to review what it does, then analyze a piece of malware, and we're going to see if we can't generate some intelligence from it. From that intelligence, that's stuff that we learned about last week. We were looking at strings, indicators that the malware was on your computer, signs that it was running, things that it did when it was running. So we talked about that from the perspective of someone who's trying to defend against the malware. So imagine that you're someone, again, who's running a network, who's managing like a corporation, a company, a university, and things are running around on your network and you want to know what they do. Maybe you find that some of it's malicious and you're trying to stop it or trying to figure out how to prevent it. What are the things you need to look out for? So we did a lot of things that would find signs of that. So we're trying to talk about this more on the defensive, not on the offensive. So we talked about this as intelligence generation. So finding these clues about what the malware is doing or where it is or what it looks like so that you can look for it and stop it. And the second thing we're going to do in this workshop is use a tool that takes that intelligence that you've gathered and turns it into a way to find that malware. So we're going to learn a program called Yara. This is something that was recommended to us by friends of the club, by people that we've met from outside and in the industry. A few of them told us that Yara is really important. You should learn Yara and learn what it does. So we're going to go over this program. We're going to learn the basics of it. So how Yara rules work. We're going to write our own rules in the program and use them to detect some files, the files that I've sent you. Just to clarify, before we go forward, there was a download that you should have downloaded for this workshop. It should be in our Discord server under workshop materials. I asked you to install Yara and to download a zip file. The zip file contains a bunch of folders and files. Those are all for Yara. There is no malware in there. There's a bunch of files. Some of them contain gibberish. Some of them contain snippets of code, but none of it is actually from malware. So there's nothing in there that's going to harm you. I wouldn't send you files that contained anything malicious. So the tools are Any.Run, the website, and Yara, the program, which you should have installed. It should have been a really quick and easy installation. Relevant courses to this are, of course, Computer Science 399.05, Introduction to Reverse Engineering, being taught by Dr. John Aycock in winter 2022. Sign up in a few weeks when course registration happens. And, of course, the Malware and Viruses course, which is no longer being taught. Womp womp. So, again, last week we went over, just a review, because we're going to be talking about some of these things again. We talked about VMs and malware sandboxes. So I sent you a machine, a virtual machine that was a VM and had some samples, had some malware samples on it and programs that we used. We talked about packing and entropy, why those things are important when trying to analyze malware. And then we broke it up sort of into two sections. We did both of these back and forth. So we talked about static analysis. And again, the important things there were hashes, the headers of files, the strings that we find inside of those files, and the imports, so the things that the files are pulling in, the functions from libraries that they use to run. So these are all things that we can use to help identify what the malware is. So that's just done statically by just looking at the file and analyzing it before it's run. Then we did dynamic analysis, which was running the file and seeing what happens when it runs and trying to find for indicators of the malware running so we can recognize it when it's actually running. So there we looked at processes, registry keys. We talked about network traffic, but we didn't get to look at any of it. And then we graphed the execution of programs. So that's just to refresh you. That's what we did last week. We're going to be doing more of that stuff this week. So to do that, we're going to be using this website. It's called Any.Run. So Any.Run is an automated online malware analysis tool. There's a screenshot of what it looks like right there. If you sign up on the website, there's a free version of it where you can sign up for free. You get some of the functionality on the website, some very basic stuff. And then there's priced options. I think the lowest tier starts at $90 a month, but you get quite a bit of stuff with that. But we're going to be playing with the website today to see the sorts of things that it can do. But yes, it's an automated malware analysis tool. So what you do here is you can upload malware samples. You can give it websites to connect to. It will set up a virtual machine. It will pull your malware sample on there or connect to a website that you list, and then it will run from there. This can be pretty tricky because, as you might have known from last week's workshop, we had to tell Windows to execute the program or to run programs explicitly multiple times. So when we opened the Microsoft document at the beginning, it said, I'm not going to run this. There's macros. We had to tell it to run macros. When we ran some of the executable files, it would warn us that these weren't recognized and maybe you shouldn't run it. And you had to say run it anyway. So Any.Run is built to do all of that automatically. It would be pretty simple to have a machine that would load a file, but to actually get the file to run sometimes is pretty tricky. So Any.Run is able to do that. Any.Run is also able to do pretty much all of the stuff that we did in our workshop last week. You're going to look at this and say, Jeremy, why did we do all of that stuff last week if there was just a website that does it all? And the answer is because it's important to learn what that stuff was before we just had a website that spit it all out for us. So I think you'll have a better appreciation of what Any.Run is and what it does, and B, understand way more what it's actually showing you when it spits everything out. So we're going to take a look at the 3 samples that we did last week. So let me get you the link to the file that we used. So you might remember that we had hashes of files, and the hashes we used to identify the actual malware itself. We could use the hash to uniquely identify each program. So I'm going to give you the link to Any.Run. And then I'm going to give you the hash of the program so that you can see that as well. So this is going to be the first one we're checking out. This is the Microsoft Office document run in Any.Run. I'll call this sample 1. So that's the link and the hash. So I want you to go to that link right there. And I'm going to pull it up myself. And we can start seeing exactly what Any.Run does. So what you're loading right now is a saved session or a saved example of malware running on the website. So every time somebody submits a sample, it will save the run through of what happened and all of the output that it had. So you can see right here, there's a screen. This is the Windows machine. Down at the bottom right here, it's flicking back and forth. That's because it's captured different scenes from the screen. So when the screen was changing, it would take snapshots, and then it just saves those snapshots for this run through. I'll show you one later that actually has video of the program running. But this just shows us what it looks like when this program is running. All around us here, there's lots of stuff. And this is all of the interesting stuff that we were looking at from last week. We had to use a lot of tools to do this. Any.Run has it all built in on its own. So let's start down at the bottom of the page here. So I'll get that off there. Start down at the bottom of the page. You can see HTTP requests, connections, DNS requests, and threats. So we talked last week about the fact that our VM, the one that I'd sent you, wasn't connected to the internet, so we couldn't do any dynamic analysis of any network traffic. But it would be really useful to see what websites any malware is trying to connect to, so that we know maybe never try to connect to those websites. Or if anything else is connecting to those websites, it also might be malware. And down here, it's showing us exactly what connections it was making. So it tells us what kind of request it was, what the response was. REP tells us what kind of sort of a reputation that might have in the Any.Run database. So the first one here, the process name was PowerShell. PowerShell tried to connect to this website, which it believes is in the United States. Amilano.net. And if you remember with the first piece of malware or the first file that we looked at last week, we went through in PowerShell and got this big long string. We took it from base 64, converted it into code, and then tried to figure out what the code did. And we saw in there that there were a bunch of URLs. These are all those URLs. So this is the code trying to connect to all of these websites right here. So Any.Run is just showing us what those websites are. It's also showing us that it believes that the first one here is malicious. One of them down here is suspicious, and it's not familiar with the other ones. But only 2 of them actually connected when this was run. And we can see up in the top right over here where the information about the file is. There's the MD5 hash that we saw before. Start is telling us when the program was run. So this is when this was submitted to Any.Run. It also tells you about the machine. It's tagged with a few different things. So yeah, this is showing us some of the network traffic. It'll also show us the connections that were made. Down here, the type of protocol that was used. This is all really fascinating and interesting information. DNS requests as well. So all of the responses, all of the IP addresses that were associated with it. Very interestingly, you can download the PCAP file right here. So sort of in the top right of this bottom box. You could download the PCAP file if you wanted to take a look at that in Wireshark and do a little more analysis on it. That's something that's handy. You can take a look at more information about the request details. So this is the second request. Tells us the URL, the method, host, all kinds of information about it. So this is everything that was contained in the HTML request. We can then also look at the data that was contained in these requests. We can get the hashes for those particular requests or the data that was being sent. So maybe we just want to look for that on our network. If we can find that, then we know that there's something suspicious going on. We can submit it to analysis. We can also download it. This is really nice. We had to set up a whole virtual machine to do all of this, and it couldn't do anywhere near this much. It would have taken quite a few programs to do it. Down on the left, so there's 3 buttons right here that you should be able to see. One of these is called Files. Files here shows you any files that are associated with the program. Over again on the right, you can click on these things and it'll show you the data that's inside of those files. So this is really nice for being able to see all the data that the program is generating, what it's actually using. We saw those last week, but we couldn't access them very easily. This gives us a really easy way to access them. And then debug, there's no data for debug on here. So that's this little box down here, network traffic and the files that are associated with it. We're going to be using some of that a little later. Up here in the top right is sort of the information box that we had. So we have the identity of this file. So this is what the file was named when it was submitted, was rep_89 blah, blah, blah. Again, the hash of the file, the very important hash, really important thing that we use a lot in malware. And then things that it's tagged with. Notice that it says tracker emotet. Emotet, I mentioned to you, was the name of a botnet or a Trojan, a network of Trojans that were used to collect banking information. So it's already tagged this, saying that this is part of this emotet system, very likely related to it. Notice that right here, there's a button called Get Sample. If you click on it, it lets you download the file. It's zipped, you'll notice. I'm going to cancel that. This little pop-up here says, hint, how to open archive. Downloaded archive password is infected. If you were in last week's workshop, that's going to look familiar to you. That was the password that we used on all of those samples. That's because all of those samples came from this website, Any.Run. So they were all downloaded from here. Next tab, and something that we're going to talk about more later, is IOC. IOC stands for Indicator of Compromise. If you open that up, it lists a whole bunch of interesting pieces of information that it thinks that you can use to try to find this malware later on. So we talked about this when we were running strings. We were trying to find IP addresses. We were trying to find websites. The hashes were interesting, and URLs were something that we were looking for manually. It's collected all of those nicely into one spot. We could restart this machine. We could also export into, I can only get the graph that it generates. Down here are the processes that run. So we have Word, which is the process that we started this with, and notice that it then runs after that almost immediately. You can see this red line over here is the thing that was run. Down here, almost immediately right after the process is started, PowerShell starts. When you click on PowerShell, you get some information about it down here. You get a warning, things that it's telling you that this PowerShell command is doing. And down here is the actual command. This should look a little bit familiar to you. PowerShell, TAC-W, hidden, EN, and then this big long blob of text. This big long string is that base 64 that we reversed last week, that we found ourselves with those programs we were using. It also tells us it's suspicious. So that's all interesting. We can also get the process graph. So if we go up here, we can click on that, and this will show us our process graph. We generated these with ProcDot last week. This one is not nearly as robust as the one that we saw last week, but we can click on each of these things and see the command line argument that was used and get information about it. And there's not much here, but we're going to see some examples that have more stuff as we go on. The last two interesting things you see, there's one text report. If you click on that, it'll generate a full written report for you to print out about this analysis that it ran. So this is all that information we saw. This could all be printed out and put on file if somebody needed to see a hard copy of this. And finally, there is attack matrix. Anyone who came to the talk from Adam McMath is going to recognize this. This is the MITRE attack framework. And he talked about using this for the intelligence work that he was doing, using it to classify the behavior of both organizations and pieces of malware. So Any.Run conveniently and very nicely packages this all up for us. So we can see here that it's labeled it with execution. So it uses PowerShell scripting and Windows management instructions. It uses scripting and query registries. So it queries the registry. You can click on this. It'll show you more information about it, which process or which things caused this to be flagged. If you want more information, click here. This brings you to the MITRE attack site, where it gives you all kinds of information on this particular indicator on querying registries. So there's tons of information there. We're not going to go through any of that, but just know that the MITRE attack framework is attached to all of this. This doesn't look like very much right now. Up in the top right, it says show all tactics. So this is only showing us the ones that this sample is using, but the framework is huge. Here's all the stuff that exists in it. So it's pretty big, and it's really nice that it breaks this down. The MITRE attack matrix is used quite frequently by businesses today. So it's nice that it shows you something familiar there. So yeah, that's what Any.Run looks like. You guys, I'm guessing, do not have accounts, or you're not signed up on accounts. But not only can you see things that people have previously submitted, you can also submit your own. Let me just see if I still have. I do not. So you would be able to see. I'm going to start a new task. So up here is new task. This is how these things are actually run. So this would start up a new machine. I can only get a Windows 7 machine because I'm not paying $90 a month for this website, although that's pretty expensive. This site is capable of a lot of things. So you could customize your installation. I could give it a URL to connect to. So actually, let's try that. Let me give it this. Which one did it connect to? Connected to this one. Let's copy this one. It's a Canadian one. So I'll tell it to connect to that. We could tell it to open it in a browser, and we can choose which browser we want. Let's have it connect in. Let's have it do Internet Explorer, just for fun. Yeah, you can specify other things. Down here, this one's important. So as a non-paying member, you can set the machine up and you can run it for a maximum of 60 seconds. If we were paying, we would be able to run the machine for many minutes. We're only going to be able to run it for 60 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And this is what it would look like if you had an account. And sorry, I'm just taking a look at a comment here. Someone says that they're having a little bit of trouble reading the monitor. Yes, sorry about that. I can try to make it bigger, but also you should be checking this out on your own machine as well. So right now it's running the machine right now. I can interact with this. I can go and find things. I can see what's on the computer. There's lots of programs that are already installed on it. So I would get this for 60 seconds. That's part of what that 60-second runtime is. And then I can see everything that's installed on here. It installs a lot of major and common programs. But this website just isn't running right now. It can't resolve it. But you can see down here, it's looking at everything that's running, all the processes that are going. I'm going to start this. It'll show us that Windows Media Player is starting up. We'll start up Chrome. Shows us that Chrome is started and all the processes that are running off of Chrome. Of course, it's Chrome, so there's a lot of stuff running. And my 60 seconds is up. So there, that's the analysis that it's generated for this run. And here it's showing us all the different screens, and these are all the things that I was doing while the program was, or while the system was running. If you attached a piece of malware, it would just run it. Things would be popping up on the screen on their own, and it would be capturing all of that, but you get to interact with it as well. Again, only for 60 seconds if you don't pay. So that goes into my history over here. Here's a few other runs that I've made. None of these are particularly interesting. So that's the basics of what that looks like. I'm going to give you the link to, we're going to check out the third piece of malware that we looked at. The last one we did right at the end. So this one I called sample 3. There's the link to it. And I'll give you the hash as well. So yeah, go to that second one, and you should be able to see a little bit more. Because our first piece, that one that ran in the Microsoft document, wasn't terribly complex. Also, we're going to be doing some hands-on stuff pretty soon. I'm going to introduce you to a new piece of malware. We're going to watch it run in here. And then I'm going to have you try to hunt for some flags. Yes, the other thing, there's some flags in today's workshop. There weren't any last week, but there should be some today that you can try to hunt for. Okay, so this is the third piece of malware that we ran last week. This was the synapsex.exe file that we ran. You can see here, this is the same hash. It doesn't seem to do exactly what we saw last week, or it doesn't look nearly as complicated as last week. No HTTP requests this time, some connections down in the bottom. The first one here, it tries to connect to 8.8.8.8. I think I showed you at the very end last week that if we'd had a network connection, we would have seen that web traffic, but we couldn't because I had shut the network connection off on that VM. But this is the malware basically checking to see if it can connect to the internet. So it's just trying to connect to the Google servers. And nicely, Any.Run tells us here that that website is whitelisted, but the next one it tries to go to is definitely malicious. So yeah, we can see the process graph, which I think again is, yeah, it's not quite as complicated as the one that we had generated last week. So it doesn't show you as much of that in-depth stuff. But again, we can check to see what's running. Again, notice that the program runs and then starts another version of itself, this time from the app data location, whereas before we had run it from, I believe, the desktop. Indicators of compromise down here, the problems that it has. Notice connects to CNC server, so that's the command and control server. Remember that this was a piece of malware from Nanocore, so this was, again, a banking Trojan that was going to sit on your computer and watch everything that you do. I went and did a little more reading about it. It turns out that what this piece of malware does is it sits in the background, watches everything that gets copied over to your clipboard, looks for anything that looks like a Bitcoin wallet. So what it's looking for are strings that look like Bitcoin wallet addresses, or the string that identifies a Bitcoin wallet. When it sees one of those, it removes it from the clipboard and replaces it with a different wallet, so that when you paste it in somewhere, hopefully you transfer Bitcoins into their account, not your account, so into their wallet and not your wallet. That's what it was doing. This whole malware was built simply to try to steal Bitcoin transactions. And that's what it was doing running in the background. So we can see more information about all of those processes that get run. And you can see the command line argument that gets run there. So that's all pretty interesting. Yeah, there we go. It's part of the tracker nanocore. And you could read more about nanocore if you went here. Gives you information about what this is and what it does. But we don't want to do that now. I'm going to give you a new link for a new piece of malware. So this malware is something that I thought was interesting. Call this new sample. Sorry, people are asking me to increase font size. Is it on the websites that I'm on that people would like to be able to see better? Just toss that into the chat to let me know. But go to the link that I've just sent you. And this is for a new piece of malware. This happened right at the beginning of the outbreak of coronavirus and the shutdown, which is just over a year ago right now, the shutdown. This is called coronavirusmap.com.exe. So the story here is that this started spreading as a program that was attached to emails. It actually runs, if you go here, you can see this window that's popped up is for a map showing the spread of coronavirus. This program actually did something legitimate. So it would start this window. It would connect to the Johns Hopkins medical database and actually plot the spread of coronavirus around the world and show you all kinds of information that it was pulling out from this database. Unfortunately, in the background, it was also running a ton of malware. And yeah, so this one's going to have the ability to actually play a video of what happened. So I just clicked play here. The process is starting. Any.Run is showing us all the stuff that's happening in real time as this is happening. You can see more processes are getting started. The map is taking a while to load up. So all this data is actually being loaded from the internet. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to load. It's not very well written, and it's also really slow. And one of the reasons it's very slow is because tons of stuff is going on in the background that's compromising this poor computer. So this video is 4 or 5 minutes long. We're about a minute into it so far. You can jump ahead. You can see no new processes are being created. So whatever the malware has done is likely finished. The person that did this actually started going through and trying to find what was happening in the computer. So they find a copy of the program has been added to the temporary data. Sorry, that's the original one that they put in. It's in temp. But they start going through and looking for signs of the malware throughout the machine. So that's what that does. I'm going to give you guys about 3 minutes just to poke around on here and check all of this out and see what you can find. I'm not going to show you everything. So yeah, play around on here, see what you notice. If you notice anything interesting, toss it in the chat. But we are going to be going through this a little more to find some of the interesting stuff, and I'm going to ask you to find things in this, which will be flags that you can feed to Orchid for those sweet, sweet points. So yeah, I'll give you guys 3 minutes. It's 6:42. I'll give you to 6:45 to just poke around on this website and see what you can find. All right, so that's about 3 minutes on the clock. Thankfully, yeah, some people found some stuff. So yeah, first comment was there was a font group program being run, which is listed as stealing credential data. Also has a Russian description. And it's writing into files, but I can't find the contents of the files. Both good things to notice. We're going to actually look at both of these things now. So yeah, we take a look. There's some web traffic that's going back and forth. Some of this we'll see is actually legitimate traffic. This data that it's showing in this program, this map, is something that it actually has to load from the internet. So we're going to actually see some of the things that it's doing is stuff that it's showing on here. The other stuff, sorry, so these are the connections that it's, a bunch of the connections that it's making. API-telegram.org, I'll show you, is some of the malicious stuff that it's doing is coming from that website. You can also see down here, it's showing you which programs are malicious and which are legitimate. I'm going to try to make this just a little bigger so you guys can see. Yeah, so if you scroll down here, again, I'm on the connections tab. It shows you that it thinks things are legitimate or whitelisted. So coronavirusmap.com, it's loading data or information from those places. Which is nice because it's showing us that on the map, but there's other things that are being loaded back here which are completely malicious. And it's identifying some bad traffic in the background as well. If I'm not sure if you looked, there's a bunch of files here. So the second tab is for files. There's a ton of files being loaded. If you scroll down, it just keeps going. There's lots of stuff being listed here, and we're going to come back to that. These are all the processes that are being run in the background as this program is run. This is all the bad stuff, or a lot of this is the bad stuff that's actually happening. So we're going to go, let's go take a look at the attack framework first. A lot more stuff on this page. That's because this program is running a whole lot of things that it shouldn't be doing, but that's just a sign that there's lots of stuff going on. Let's go to the process graph. So this is the process graph for this one. This one's much bigger than the previous ones that we saw. I believe we can use Control to zoom in and just click around. So this shows the start of the program. These are a bunch of connections that it made. This is where you might notice there's some Russian attached to some of these things. Someone mentioned that they noticed something Russian. This is one of the places where you're going to notice that. I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone, but when you're doing a malware workshop and Cyrillic fonts, Cyrillic text starts coming up, that's a bit of a sign that what you're looking at might not be completely safe. So yeah, this is the process that's running. So it runs coronavirusmap.com.exe, which is a great name for a file. It then shows us that it runs coronavirusmap.com.exe again. It then also runs corona.exe. You can see where that's coming from. So it looks like it's stealing personal information. It runs command.exe, and here's what it runs. So it runs cmdc and then runs this corona.bat file. So there's an interesting file we might want to try to find, corona.bat, corona.sfx.exe. So it runs another thing here. Not much that I can find there in that command line that looks interesting. Corona.exe. So it runs corona.exe. It then runs bin.exe and build.exe. Also over here, it runs, so build.exe runs. It starts this thing, the font Windows globalization font groups.exe, which Any.Run identifies. You can see here this hashtag QLab. That's that's being identified as a specific type of attack or as being associated with a specific malware network. So it's saying QLab was detected. If we click on QLab, nope, we can't find anything in there. We would have to search. We can search QLab to find out more about it. But then it runs that font group globalization thing and attrib.exe. So it runs this bin.exe up here. Again, that's a bin file. Not much there. If I click on more info. So these are all the registry changes that are being made by bin.exe. So again, this is just showing us way more information. Yes, someone actually found what we're going to be getting at in a minute. Someone says, oh, there's a passwords.txt for a honeypot. Yeah, we're going to get to that in just a minute. So yeah, we can click on a process. It'll show us all the things that that process is doing. So remember the registry we talked about last week? The registry is important because it controls a lot of settings in Windows. Bin.exe is making a bunch of changes to the registry. It'll even show us the data for some of those things that it's changing. It's showing us that it's making writes to the registry in a bunch of different places. So that's interesting. Go back. Our QLabs part over here, it's modifying a lot of files. There's 18 different files that are getting modified. 19 registry changes again that are happening. It's doing 5 HTTP requests. So again, there's that api.telegram.org website that we saw before. Any.Run is saying that it's identified it as malicious, so it's telling us based on its database that this is a malicious website. We would want to take that and put it on a list of maybe blacklisted websites and IP addresses. Any.Run's saying this website's reputation is unsafe. Not 100% what that is. We can see the headers for it for the HTTP requests. We can show the content of the request. So this is the sort of thing that you could see in Wireshark. Again, really nice that we can just see all of this stuff right up front and all of the connections that are being made. So that's interesting. So it runs attrib.exe. Attrib.exe is a utility in the Windows command line that is used to change file attributes. It can actually be used to hide files. So we can see down here, the command that is being run is +s+h, and then this file name. What this is doing is actually hiding this file. So +s and +h are two attributes of the file that actually hide it. So +h is going to change the file to hidden, and +s is going to make it a systems file, so that it'll be flagged as if it's an important file for Windows. So not only will Windows keep the file hidden, but even if you show hidden files, it will still try to hide it from you. I was going to demonstrate that to you, but I think we're going to skip that for now. But just to know that attrib.exe is something that malware will use on Windows systems to hide files. So seeing this run is super suspicious. It means that whatever this file is something that isn't good. This one back here, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on with. Here's a big long command line argument that's being run. So it's running a file here, .exe, and then a tac y mx, and then it's running c users admin app data roaming, and then this file enu6887e .7z. That's a zip file. So there's a zip file that's being run in here. So let's take a little more. Let's take a look at this. So yeah, it's modifying this file. This is a zip file. No registry changes, no HTTP connections, just this weird zip file. Let's take a look at this file. Unfortunately, it's zipped, but we can also download the file. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to save the file. Again, it's going to be saved, the password infected. Let me open this up. Copy this into my favorite folder, rm-me. So there we go. I've extracted it in here. It's still a 7.7z. I'm going to unzip this. Someone asks, isn't that dangerous? Yes, it is, if you don't know what it is. I know what it is, so I'm going to do this. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. There we go. I've unzipped this folder. So that was the zip file that the program was creating. I've gone ahead and gotten rid of it, and this is what it looks like over here. So this is what was inside that zip that was being created by the malware. So the first thing is that is a screenshot of the desktop where the program was running. So it saved that. And then it saved passwords, Firefox information, autofills, and it has a folder called cookies here. That's a lot of information that it was using and stealing. So you can also find that down here in the files. So remember I said that there was a lot of files that were being created. Here's a long list of them. We can filter the files. So if we search password, there is passwords.txt. So there's what's in that passwords.txt file. What were some of the others that we saw? We saw one called autofills. There's the autofills file that it had. So yeah, this is the information that this malware was trying to collect and very likely exfiltrate from the machine. So it's collecting all of this into a zip file. It was probably then going to try to send that zip file off to another server somewhere. So yeah, that's exactly what that is. That's just a zip of some files that the malware created. Not only did it create those files, though, but there's stuff inside of those files. So we ran some of those samples. We've run this. And now there are flags that you can find. So in those files, there is information. If you look in them and read through that information, you can submit the following to Orchid to get those juicy points on our leaderboard. So I've put 4 of them in. This is what they look like. The stars are the characters. I've told you that there are dots, and this is how many characters are in each flag. This is an underscore, so there's 2 words separated by an underscore. So there are 4 flags that you can find. The first 3 are from that information that we were just looking at. This is why I wasn't really opening those files. I can go back and tell you which files they're inside of. But let me toss it in the chat. It's passwords, information, and autofills for the first 3. Okay. Check for flags. 2, 3 autofills. So there we go. I just tossed it into chat. Those are 3 of the. It didn't format great. Those are 3 of the files that you can check: information, passwords, and autofills. If you go back over here, Information, there's information.txt. You take a look at that and scroll through here, and you can find the answers to one of those flags. So I'm going to give you guys, let's say, about 5 minutes to go through and find those. Remember, you can DM Orchid those on our server. DM them to Orchid. Don't just paste them into the open chat for everyone. Open a direct message or message Orchid directly with the flags. Remember, you need to find the part that's inside, but it's surrounded by UCSec with the curly braces. Yep, there you go. How do we feed Orchid flags? Just DM Orchid. So I would do it myself. Let me just see. I would do it myself, but I worry that I've already sent flags to Orchid, and I don't want to reveal flags to you guys. Because the first rule of flags is do not share flags. Yep. So I'm just going to clear all the messages. There we go. This is my direct message with Orchid. So I went into the club server, went to the Orchid channel, right-click on Orchid, message. There we go. Now I can direct message Orchid. So I can say, UCSec, ceci n'est pas une flag. And Orchid doesn't say anything because that's not actually a flag. When you find a flag, though, it will tell you that you have found a flag. Otherwise, I believe it just doesn't say anything to you. So yeah, I'll give you guys 5 minutes to find some of those. When you find a flag, it will look something like this. Orchid replies, you found a beginner or advanced flag. In this case, it's telling you must claim a level. So sometimes you're going to have to set a level, either advanced or I think beginner were the 2 levels. Once you set that up, you get something like this. You found a flag worth, this one was 1 point. Again, if you have any questions, toss them in the chat or in our club Discord server. All right, I'm just going to check. Does anyone need any more time? Just toss it in the chat if you do. It usually takes a minute for replies to come in. But I'm going to take that slide and toss it in the stream chat in our club Discord server for people to take a look at if they want to keep looking for those a little later. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. So we're going to move on to sort of the second part of this workshop. So we've looked at Any.Run. It's a great website for tossing some malware or some samples in just to see what they do. As you can see, that website is pretty great. It spits back a ton of information and lets us look at almost everything that's being generated by the program. So I talked about this before, but now we're going to talk about indicators of compromise, or IOC. So indicators of compromise are something that we were looking for last week. We didn't really call them this, but we are talking about them now because we are going to use them for our next program, which is Yara. So the definition that I found is pieces of forensic data, such as data found in system log entries or files that identify potentially malicious activity on a system or network. That sounds pretty formal, but we've been playing around with them for almost 2 workshops now. We know that they're just strings, websites, IP addresses, imports, anything that the malware is using that we could try to look for on our computer that would identify either that the malware is on the system or that it is running or has run on the system. So these indicators of compromise are great because they let us go hunting and try to find these programs. This is the sort of trail of breadcrumbs that they leave behind that we can go hunting for. So yeah, we talked about strings, IP addresses, file names, byte patterns as well. You might remember last week we looked at the headers and the bytes in a file to see if there was anything in there that we could recognize. So we are going to jump into Yara next. Yara stands for either yet another ridiculous acronym or yet another recursive acronym. Either way, that's a fantastic acronym for a program. But Yara has been out for about 8 years now. It's a program that is used all over the place in threat detection and defense on both computer systems and networks. Essentially what Yara does is it looks for all of those indicators of compromise and tries to find them in files and systems. It's a pretty straightforward and simple program. It was programmed about, I think it was 2013 it came out, so it's been out for quite a while now. It is integrated into a lot of systems, a lot of automated systems as well that exist out there today. It's pretty common that if you're doing any sort of defense on a network, that you're probably using or know of Yara. It's so common that websites, malware websites, things like Symantec, any of those malware defense companies, if they put out any sort of, actually I think I have one up here. If they put out any sort of report on a piece of malware, and if this one loads, would be good. This is Joe Sandbox Cloud. This is something that I found through VirusTotal when I was searching up that coronavirus malware that we just looked at. So this is a report that this website has generated. You're going to find signatures over here, and you'll notice down here that there is Yara listed. So Yara detected these 3 things, and it tells you some information on what Yara found. Oops. But more importantly, like I said, Yara is so common and prevalent that in a report like this, if it wants to load, says it's loading, but it's not doing anything. That on this website, it will actually give us a whole bunch of information to feed into Yara in order to find this piece of malware if it's running anywhere on our system or anywhere on our network. Looks like it might be loading this time. Yeah. So if I scroll down more, we can find startup. This again is that graph of everything that was running. We saw that in Any.Run. Malware configuration, and the third thing that's listed here is Yara overview. So initial sample, and then it shows us all sorts of information. So yeah, the Yara information is pretty common for malware and suspicious files and processes these days. So we're going to dig in and learn a little more about it and the basics of how it works and actually making our own rules to feed into Yara. I have to say that Yara was the brainchild of this guy, fan of the power pose. His name is Florian Roth. I think this photo is kind of ridiculous because over the last week, I've seen lots of profiles of people that work in information security. They're all slightly askew, head a little to the side, and they've got their arms crossed. They're very serious people. So this made me laugh. But a lot of credit to this guy. He's very sharp. He's the one that created and is largely responsible for the upkeep of Yara. He is also responsible for other Yara-related tools. One of them is called Thor. The other one is called Loki. There, you might notice all Norse god named. They're part of what's called the Valhalla rule feed. So things that work with Yara tend to be named after Norse gods. And he's also responsible for Yargen, and we'll learn what that does pretty soon. But this guy's name gets tossed around when you start talking about Yara. So yes, what does Yara do? Yara uses rules-based file analysis. So it is like grep, but it's way more sophisticated. So we saw before that if we were looking at a piece of malware, it might have a string inside of it or an IP address. And if we wanted to find that IP address, we could have the firewall block it. But if we wanted to find a file on our computer that had that string inside of it, we could just grep our machine and see if there's anything that had that IP address. Yara basically is a very complicated and sophisticated version of grep, but it can do a lot of stuff. It's pretty powerful, and it's you're going to see pretty simple to use. But the way to think of it for now is just think of it like grep, but with more power. So it can check multiple patterns. Grep we usually use to find sort of one thing. Yara can search for multiple strings. It can use logic for refining its matches. So you're going to see this as well. You can tell it I want to find this, but not this. Any two of these, one of those, two of these. It's very complicated, but it can get really powerful. So the first thing you need to know is that a Yara rule always consists of the following three things. It consists of a rule name, a string or a pattern, and then conditions or the logic for the program. So those are the three things. We're going to see an example of what one of these files looks like. So here is an example rule for Yara. This is the standard template. This is what they all look like. So the first thing that it shows is we said that a Yara rule needs a name, and there's the rule name right there. So this rule is called Hello World. What follows, everything in curly braces, is what defines that rule or what makes up that rule. So the first thing we have is a description. This is the meta tag that you see there. All of this is just descriptive information. None of it actually affects the rule. It doesn't have to be in there, but we're all good programmers. We know that commented code is best code. So your Yara rule should have some of these. And remember that these things get shared a lot online. So just creating a rule with no description on it is not very useful for the other people that take your rule and try to implement it, because they might not know what the devil it's for. You'll see some really complicated ones and understand why no comments might be a bad thing. So next are the strings. So these are the patterns that it's looking for. So this is defining what it's trying to find. So again, it's defined with strings right here. And then here are the strings. So they're tagged with the $sign and then some identifier. And then they're set equal to something. So the first one is equal to hello, second one's equal to world, third one, ignore, is equal to foo. So this is what the Yara rule is going to use to find what it's looking for. The third thing we said that it needs is a condition, or the logic for the search. So the condition on this search is it wants to find hello or world and not ignore. So we're trying to find a file that has either hello or has world inside of it and does not have foo inside of it. Remember I said that Yara rules were really powerful and they used logic. This is where the logic comes in, and these logic statements can get pretty long, pretty complex, or as complicated as we want them to, which means that we can do some really powerful searching with Yara. So again, that's just what a common Yara rule looks like. We are now going to try our first Yara rule. So I gave a link to the files that we were going to use. It was a zipped folder called Yara examples. Inside was the Yara examples folder. So go into that and then go into example 1, the folder example 1, and there should be 2 files in there. And I want you to write 3 Yara rules. I want you to write a rule that detects both files, a rule that detects the first but not the second, and a rule that detects the second but not the first. I will show you exactly what that means, and then I'll show you how to actually run the file. So let me get out of here. Let me go to, so this is what it looks like for me. This is the Yara examples folder. So I go into example 1, and I told you there were 2 files in there. So there's one called my first Yara, the other one's called my second Yara. You're allowed to look in them. My first Yara contains hello world. My second Yara just contains hello. So I want you to write a rule that finds both of these files, a rule that would only find the first one but not the second one, and a rule that would find the second one but not the first one. They should be pretty straightforward to write. But again, I'm going to leave this example up here for you. But before I do that, I'm going to move this over so that I can work on them as well. So yeah, that's what we're going to do for, let's say about 4 minutes. I'll give you. Start writing a rule, one that will find my first Yara and my second, one that finds the first one but not the second, and one that finds the second one but not the first. And it's okay if you're confused and you're not sure what to do, toss that in the chat if that's the case. But go ahead and try creating a rule, and then we're going to run them and see how they actually work. As an example, I'm going to write mine in Vim. So it's just some text. You could write this in Visual Studio. You could write it in Notepad++, whatever your preferred text editor is. Just go ahead and write it in there. And the actual file, the rule file, should be a .yar file, .yar. You can see on the screen here how to run. The rule file is some name .yar. All right, I'm going to say that's time. Was anyone able to write some rules or to run the program? Toss it in chat if you were. Otherwise, I'm going to show you what my rules looked like. Right after I try to increase the size of the font, on my window. There we go. Okay. So let me go to Vim. I called mine rule1.yar. And this is what my rules look like. So here's the first rule, here's the second rule, and this is something I never mentioned. You can put more than one rule in the file. So I have 3 rules in here. So rule 1, we have the meta tag. Description is detect both. So it's looking for the strings section. It defines hello, so it's looking for the string hello. Condition is just set to hello. Condition is just set to hello. So that's just saying it'll be true if hello is found in any of the files. So remember, hello is just looking for uppercase hello. Rule 2, meta description is detect 1, but not 2. So detect the first file, but not the second. Remember, the first file has world in it. So I'm telling it to look for world exclamation point. We know the second one doesn't have that, so the second one shouldn't be returned if it finds this. And then there's rule 3. So I want it to detect the second one, but not the first one. The difference is that the second one doesn't have world in it. So I set up the same rule or the same string world, except in this one I tell it the condition is not world. So I'm looking for a file that does not contain world in it. So that's what the rule looks like. And then I run them. So I run Yara, and then rule1.yar, so that's my rule file. And then I could specify a specific file if I wanted. So my first yara.txt. So rule 1 and rule 2 both return true on my first yara.txt, but rule 3 does not. And that's good because that's what we wanted. This one's supposed to return the first one, this one the first one. But I can also just run this on everything in here. I can just put dot. I don't have to specify a specific file. I can just put a dot in here, and there's all the rules that get returned by the different files. It's going to be a little confusing, though, because in this directory, I have my first Yara, my second Yara, so those example files we had. I also have rule1.yar, which is this file. The file with the rules in it is also going to be run in this example. So it is telling me that rule1.yar is being returned for these 2 rules as well, which is interesting. So yeah, it scans everything in the directory and returns these. So what it's returning is it's returning which rule was triggered and then the file that triggered that rule. So that's the way that the Yara rules. This is what Yara does at its simplest. If there's any questions, toss them in the chat right now. I'll try to answer them, but we're going to keep moving and see other things that Yara can do. So we have a few more examples. So that's Yara in a nutshell. So what are some other things that Yara can do? Yara can do byte matching. So Yara can look for byte sequences that are in files. So this is an example of it trying to match any file that contains this sequence of bytes in the data of the file. So in strings, it sets up hex strings. It calls them hex strings. These names don't have to be anything particular. It doesn't have to be prefixed with hex. These are just descriptive. There are conventions in Yara. We're not really going to get into them. But if you go online, there are conventions for how to label the strings in here. So in this case, It's looking for the byte pattern 0 through F, uppercase or lowercase, and then this very specific pattern right here, which is the one that it specifies up here. So those are the strings it wants. The condition is match any file containing. So it says hex string 1 or hex string 2 or hex string 3. So it's looking for any of these. So that's what byte matching looks like. We can also do wildcards in the byte matching. We can also do wildcards in strings. So we can say that we're looking for this pattern. So this is where we start going into like pattern matching in bytes. We might know that there's certain sequences with some things that get changed in between. This is what it would look like. We can put question marks in here. And it'll match anything that has this on both sides. You might be asking yourself right now, can Yara use regular expressions? And of course, Yara can use regular expressions. Everything uses regular expressions. Who doesn't love the power of regular expressions? But you can use regex in Yara 100%. You're going to notice down here, this is another example of using wildcards to match. But in this case, we can do or statements inside the hex string. So it's going to start with F4, 2, 3, and then it will have either 6, 2, B4, or 5, 6, or 4, 5, 2 random bytes, and then 6, 7. Any 2 bytes, and then 6, 7, and then it's going to finish with 4, 5. So you can start to see that's going to look for quite a few different patterns. That's going to get pretty complicated. It can do offset matching. So this example here will match any file containing MZ at offset 0. So the string it's looking for is just MZ, and the condition is that MZ is at 0. Does anyone off the top of their head know why you would want to look for MZ at 0? Does that make sense to anyone? If it does, toss it in the chat, toss an answer in there. Yeah, who doesn't love a regular expression? Yes. The answer is to find executable files on Windows and for a fun.exe file. So you guys remember, I made a point of telling you that executable files in Windows.exe files start with MZ at the beginning of their byte sequence. I believe it's 4D54. That might not be right, but those are the 2 bytes. But those are going to be the first 2 bytes in the file. So we could either specify what those bytes were, or we could specify what the string is at the beginning of the file. And this one is telling it that MZ will only be located at 0. So it's only going to look at, yeah, other people got it. Good. It's only going to look for executable or for files that start with that, which is going to indicate that they're executable files. We're going to see why that's really handy soon. It can use lots of logic. So this is a bit of a silly one in the beginning here. So string 1, 2, and 3 are all labeled as hello. But the condition it lists is any of them. So any of them is recognized in Yara, meaning any of the strings that are listed. Other options are all of them, so it has to be all of them. One of them, any of string star, so anything that starts, any pattern, sorry, any one of these specified ones that start with string, it'll find any of these. You can tell it to just find 2 of these. You can tell it to find one of string 1 or string 2. Yeah, you can start to see that this is going to get this can get pretty powerful. You can write some really complicated logic for the conditions of these. Yara can also count, which is really nice. So this searches for the string hello, and the condition is that hello has to be greater or equal than 5. So it says any file containing at least 5 hello strings is what this is saying. So it'll return that file name if it contains at least 5 hello strings or more. File size is also something that Yara can test for. So this makes Yara test only files that are less than 2 megabytes for all of the rules. So it sets some some global rule here, and it says condition file size less than 2 megabytes. So any rule in this file will now be set to only search for files that are less than 2 megabytes. Again, another nice feature that Yara has. Yes, so the second one would be to jump to the second example. So try opening example 2, and then write a rule that detects the file. So again, this thing that you're seeing up here, this is just the example rule. This is to remind you that it has the meta, strings, and then a condition. You want to just detect the file that's located in example 2. Let me go in there. Example 2 has one file in there. You need to try to detect that file. Use things that we've done before to try to figure out how you could detect that file using Yara. I'll give you guys about 2 minutes to go ahead and give that a try. So write a Yara rule again that tries to detect that file. And again, toss any questions you have in the chat. All right. So come back. Anyone have any trouble? Anyone not able to detect it? The sort of key on this one that I wanted you to do was to first figure out what the rule was even going to be. So it's a single file in there. It would be easy enough to just maybe use the file name, something like that. But what I wanted you to try to remember was that, sorry. was that when we are looking for indicators, what we want to do is find something in the file. So I'm going to run strings on this file. Again, there was nothing malicious in these. This is a compiled C file that's doing nothing much at all. We can look in here and we can find all kinds of things, all kinds of strings that are inside of this file. If you've ever looked at a compiled C file before, you're going to know that a lot of these are pretty normal to find inside of a C file. And if you told your computer to flag anything that had dot data inside of it, it would flag almost every compiled file that was on your computer. We don't want to flag files like that. We want to find something that might be unique to this file. Again, libc, not that interesting, but there's a couple of strings down here that look interesting. One of them says downloading website data, but interestingly, downloading is misspelled. That could be something that's pretty unique to this file. The other one is that it says it's connecting to an IP address and failed to connect to IP address. Again, those could be indicators that this file is up to something, but those are indicators of compromise that we could try to look for. So the misspelling of downloading is something that could be unique, is probably pretty unique to this file, and these IP addresses are definitely something that we'd be curious about. So I wrote a rule. What was the name of that rule? Yar rule.yar. This is what my rule looked like. So I have two strings I'm looking for. So misspell download with two O's, and the other one is just that IP address that we're looking for. And my condition is just to find any of them. So there's an example of what it would be like to sort of use the strings or the intelligence that we gathered to start building Yara rules around finding compromise or malicious files. So let me show you what some real life rules actually look like. So we looked at some files that dealt with the Emotet malware. Here's an example of one rule that was written to find Emotet malware. So these are all the strings, and here's the condition down here. There's a lot of different strings. So data for the overlay. So there's a specific place in the file where there's these byte strings. These byte patterns that it's looking for. This seems to be common to that Emotet malware. And you want to try to make these, again, both as specific and as general as possible. So you want to make them specific so that it's only finding things in these files, but you want to make them general so that if someone changed this malware around a little bit, it would still catch the changed version. You're going to remember that last week we talked about the import tables, and there was a hash for those import tables, and we could use just the hash for that import table. Well, this is the kind of thing that we're doing here as well. Yes. Okay. So there's a question in here asking, what does ASCII wide mean? So this is something you can put after a string to indicate some rules for that specific string. So ASCII means that the text is encoded as ASCII text. Wide means that it's encoded as, I think, UTF-8. Or no, Unicode. It's encoded as Unicode. So wide tells it to look for this string in two different encodings. Something else that you could write after this would be no case. And that would tell it that it doesn't matter what case the letters are in. So it could do upper and lower case matching. Good question. So yeah, this section here, these signatures, are signatures used in the samples to denote the beginning or the end of the payload executable. So it's looking for those things. So compressed PE payload headers located in the overlay section. So again, this is part of the payload header that it's looking for. This seems to be common to a lot of these files. And then function prologue for the payload extraction. Again, it's looking for more byte patterns. And then the condition is PE file. So that's another thing that Yara recognizes. So another, like a packed file or a packaged executable. I can't remember if that's what PE stands for. And then any of them. So any of these is what it's trying to find. So another rule. This is trying to find, these are two rules trying to find signs of the Mimikatz exploit. So this one's just straight up using the bytes, patterns of bytes that it's trying to find within the file itself. So this condition up here is trying to find, if it finds all of these, that's an indication that Mimikatz, that the file is related to Mimikatz. This one down here, just 3 of them. So any of these 3 being found would trigger the rule. Here is a far more complicated rule. Lots of strings in this one. So full word, I believe, indicates that it can't be part of, if I can't 100% remember, I believe full word means that it can't be part of something else. So it has to be, I think, if I remember, spaces on either side of the word. So for example, down here we have sunshine. If sunshine was in a bigger block of text, it wouldn't, I don't think it would match it. It would only match it if it was alone on its own. But you can see up here, there's a description. So it's trying to find some malware signature for a worm. The author is Florian Roth. This is written in 2015. Here's the hash. Notice that it's starting with MZ. There it is. Yeah, 4D5A. So that's the pattern we're looking for at the very beginning. You can see down here, condition MZ at 0. So that's the header that notes that it's an executable. So this is only going to find files that are executables. And then it's looking for all of these different things in the file. So it's looking for an executable and then you can see all of these brackets start coming into play. 1 of S and 1 of X, or all of A and 2 of X, or 5 of Z and 2 of X, and the file size is less than 200,000 bytes. So there's a very specific rule that's probably been honed in. So the next, we're going to talk about the concept of goodware. So goodware is the opposite of malware. I hate the word goodware. I think it's cumbersome, but it's the opposite of malware. It's files we want to keep. And so with our indicators of compromise or our patterns, like I said, we don't want to be too broad or too narrow. So if your pattern is too broad, then goodware gets flagged, and that's called a false positive. So we have good files that get flagged by Yara as malware or as bad files. That's a false positive. The other thing is if the pattern is too narrow, then malware can go undetected, and that's a false negative. So if Yara runs on your system and comes back and says, nope, nothing found, that's supposed to make you feel good and like things are okay on your system. Yeah, that's a false sense of security because you've had false negative in your patterns that have been returned. So yeah, making these rules can be really tricky because you want to, again, make it a little bit broad so that the file that you have and also any variants of that file are going to get caught. But if you make it too specific to that one file, only that specific file will get caught. And like we saw before, you can change a few bytes around in files. You can change some of the names around. You can try to obfuscate them. This will completely change the hash and the signature and what it looks like to Yara. So if Yara is looking for the names of variables in the file and the variables names just get changed, then it's not going to get detected by Yara. So this is why it's nice to use those byte those byte sequences, because those might stay the same in different versions. So this is where we come up with, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the extensions or expansions on Yara. I told you it's been used for a long time. It's very popular. There's a lot of automation tools, a lot of tools that have been written for it. So Loki, again, was one of those ones that Florian Roth wrote. So it's an indicator of compromise scanner. So it uses... it's a tool basically built on top of Yara. So it will check file names, it'll check Yara rules, it'll check hashes, and it will do this thing, C2 back connect check. So checking things that the malware is trying to connect to as well. So this is a more robust version of Yara. It can also check multiple Yara rules. This is what it looks like. when Loki runs. So it starts up here, and then it starts saying that it has found malware hash type. It's started finding matches. Yara rule match, malware hash type. And then at the end, it just says indicators connected, and it tells you where those files are. So you might be saying, well, it's going to be pretty time consuming to build all of these Yara rules. And of course, your friend and mine, Florian Roth, has built a program which generates Yara rules. So this program is called Yargen. It says down here, the main principle is the creation of Yara rules from strings found in malware while removing all strings that also appear in goodware files. Therefore, Yargen includes a big goodware strings and opcode database as zip archives that have to be extracted before the first use. So the idea here is that it will generate its own Yara rules by scanning some files, some suspicious file for IOCs, comparing what it's found, those IOCs, against strings in popular goodware, so things that are in good files, and then only using the ones that aren't in the goodware. So it doesn't want to generate false positives. So Yargen is another automated tool that has been built to try to automatically generate Yara rules. So like you can see, if files start coming into a network and they've never been seen by the network before, you could have a script that runs that just tosses the file into Yargen and generates some rules for it. In case it turns out to be malware, you can have something that you can automatically start running to find all those files and start cleaning them out. So example 3, you can now give a shot for. So example 3, the example 3 folder. What I want you to do is write a rule that detects only 465C1638S.bin and detects that file and this file here. They've got a bunch of janky random names, but those are some bigger files to play around with. Again, I'll give you, what time do we have? We've got about 5 minutes left. We're going right to the end of the time. So yeah, I'll give you about 3 minutes to generate that. Okay, back again. That was a little longer than I'd planned, but I had trouble getting my rule to work, and it was because I had bad logic. So I'll show you what I did. So we have a couple of files here. I know that was pretty quick. I have the benefit of knowing what these files are. So let's look at the first one, 465. So it is a .bin file, which is a hint to you that it is an executable file. So if you go to the start of the file, there's our good friend MZ. It starts with 4D5A. So that's we know a good thing to search for. The other two don't have that. I just know that. You guys would have had to have done a little bit of checking. The other thing we want to find is some way to figure out, some way to identify this file, but not this file over here. So I just ran cat on that file. It's just a bunch of text talking about calculators. I noticed that the word transcendental was in here. That can't be used very often. It also has European Central Bank. That's probably pretty unique to that file. So I wrote some pretty simple rules. The first one just finds the MZ rule. So it's just finding which one's an executable. It's only the first one. The second one is looking again for what's an executable and the string transcendental. And the condition is the first or the second. My logic error was I wrote and of course, none of them have both of those things. I noticed that. I changed it to or. So if I then run that, so I run it on everything in that folder, so just the dot, this is what comes back. So rule 2 is triggered for the first file and the second file. Rule 1 is only triggered for the first file. Rule 2 is also triggered for the Yara rule file because, of course, it contains both of those things. Okay, so that's that. Now was the time for the flag hunt. It is 8 o'clock on the nose, the end of the workshop. The question was, why didn't the and work? So the reason that and doesn't work is because there was no file that has both the word transcendental and is also an executable file. So this file here is executable, but doesn't have transcendental. This one has transcendental, but is not executable. And I was telling it that both of those had to be true. So the file had to have the word transcendental and be an executable file. When I changed it to or, it meant that only one of those conditions had to be true, and one of those is true for both of these files, but not true. Neither of those is true for this file. So the last flag hunt was set up for the last folder that you had. So there are 2 flags. Okay. That's all right. Just a bit of confusion. Yeah, no, I didn't include the European Bank one. So yeah, the last thing that we were going to do in this workshop, I'll come back to this and post it in the club chat, but I'll explain it here right now. There are 2 more flags, 20 points, and the last one is 50 points. They are located in the folder here, example 4. So if you open up example 4, it contains a bunch of folders. Each of these can contain files. They can also contain more folders. There's a whole bunch of files that are in here. In these folders, some of them have files in them. The files are all different sizes. And the ones that are different sizes, almost all of them just contain junk data. In 2 of these files, there are strings. There are lines of text. They are the first lines in the files. You will know them when you see them because all the other data is just junk. So you're going to see some ASCII string, and the hint that you can use to find them is right here. So flag 1, it's a string at the top of the file. Again, you put it inside of the UCSec flag format. So the string that you find goes in between these curly braces. It's at the top of the file. So if you open the file, if you run cat on it, if you strings it, it should be the first string that comes up. It's in a file that contains this hex code, somewhere between 0 and 100 in the bytes of the file. So it's located between the 0th and 100th byte. There is this pattern, so you should be able to use that to find that one. Flag 2, again, is at the top line of the file, and the file that it's located in is larger than 300 kilobytes and contains the word emotet 5 times. Using those 2 clues, you should be able to build some Yara rules that will narrow down the files that they're located in. You could possibly just use grep, but if you do that, you get the points, but you won't learn nothing. So the question was a good question. The one thing I wanted to explain was, what's the command to search multiple files again? And the reason I was doing this is because, sorry. Also, I didn't mention there are 3 files located in the folder, emotet.yar, example.yar, and mimikatz.yar. Those are examples of Yara files. There's more that we didn't see in example.yar. So you can take a look at those if you want more examples, but I'm going to go into example 4. If I wanted to search through these, you might be familiar with grep. We can search recursively. It turns out that Yara is, like we said, just as powerful and then some. It can also search recursively. So when I do my search, I go Yara tac r rule.yar, so whatever the rule is, and then dot. And that way it'll search, the dot will search the directory that I'm in, but also every subdirectory in this directory tree. Does dot search recursive directories? It does not. You have to specify, dot only searches the current directory. You need to use that tac r to search recursively. Good question. So using this trick, the tac r and this directory, so that's this directory, and the tac r says everything inside of this directory. Using that and these hints, you should be able to find the files and find the flags that'll gain you those points. Again, I'll take a snapshot of this screen and post it in the club chat. I'll put it in the stream chat just so we can wrap up for tonight. So just to remind you, we started out, we said we wanted to learn about Any.Run, the review of the functionality, analyze a piece of malware, and intelligence generation. Again, I'm just going to point out to you guys, I know we did it before, but on Any.Run, there was a specific spot that listed IOCs. So up here, just to connect it all back, here's a list of the IOCs that Any.Run found that you could use to toss into Yara. And you can actually copy these things out of here. Or you can select some of them and copy them to the clipboard. So that's just to show you like how common IOCs are in threat hunting and in malware. So we did all of those things. Then we said we were going to learn Yara. We learned how rules work, and we wrote some of our own rules. So you now know the basics of how Yara works. It's much more powerful. It can do a lot more things. We've only sort of scratched the surface on it. It integrates really nicely into other programs. A lot of other things are built on top of Yara to do a lot of searching. I know that personally, I'm probably going to use this instead of grep at times because it seems like it can do a lot more searching and is a really great tool. So now you can say that you know what it is and you know the basics of how to use it if you're ever out there and talking to people. A great basic skill to have. So with that, we'll see you next week. And a reminder that our speaker is going to be Emily Vincent. She's going to be talking about hiring and recruiting. It should be a great talk. It's the last in our speaker series. I hope to see you then. One more workshop after that. And then we're wrapping up for the whole year. We're getting towards the end of both the semester and the academic year. I can't believe it's already happening. But that's it. Yeah, so that's it for tonight. Thanks for joining along for the 2 malware workshops that we did. I hope you guys found them interesting and learned a bunch of stuff. If you have any questions, comments, anything you would have liked to have seen that we didn't do, feel free to toss it in the club chat, DM myself or any of the other execs to let us know. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out for so long. Sorry I went a little bit over time, but thanks for playing around, and we hope to see you guys next week for the speaker series talk. Everyone have a great night. Thanks.